part 2 of building the green bean tube screamer.
Okay, so we're going to start building the Mad Bean, or the green bean from Mad Bean. And I got the list of all the parts over here, so I'm just looking at the numbers here, and it says, you know, R1 through 21, and those are all the resistors. So let's go get R1, that's a 1 meg resistor here. And we'll put it in, where is R1 there? Oh, there it is. Right, I'm going to put in a few resistors and then solder them all at once. I try to put in a big group. So this one's a blue resistor here, right, that I just put in. These blue ones are 1%, so they're off by, you know, 1% of their stated value, and these brown ones I think are 5%, right, so they can be off by a little more, but for this kind of work it really doesn't matter. I think sometimes on some projects they'll say, like, use a 1% resistor here because it's important, but in general. There we go. Yeah, that looks pretty good. We'll solder all these guys, right? So got the soldering iron all fired up. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm gonna like clip these guys off here.
Nice and tidy.
Yeah. Oops. There we go. So that's the first 5 there. I need a 47K resistor and I don't have it. So these larger parts right here are 1/4 watt, and these smaller resistors are 1/8 watt. But for this circuit, the 1/8 watt resistors are fine. So I have a 47K in the 1/8 watt size. So I'm going to use that one for R7. Right. These are good. These small ones are good for, like, if you're trying to fit a circuit in one of those little tiny boxes, right? The 1590A. So I've been buying the 1/8 watt resistors lately because they're better for those. I like to examine the joints, you know, like after you solder them, just to kind of check them, you know.
From both sides.
Yeah. So if I'm seeing like a little solder kind of come through on this side, that's good. I feel like I got a good solder joint, you know. So that's pretty good. We're almost done with the resistors here, right? Okay, there we go. So that's looking pretty good for all the resistors there.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, I think that looks all right.
Can I see the other side?
Yeah.
Very nice.
I like to hold it up to the light and just check for solder bridges. Okay, so now we need the capacitors, right? So let's start in on those, right? So let's see, 47N. Oh, here we go. So it's good to like start with the parts that are lowest to the or shortest, you know, off the circuit board, and then work your way up to the taller parts. Because when you turn it over, they kind of like they kind of hold themselves in. But if you have the tall ones in there, the short ones will like kind of fall out while you're trying to solder them, you know. Usually you can kind of bend the legs a little bit to kind of hold them in place. With these square capacitors like this, I like them to sit like square to the top of the circuit board, so they're not kind of like, you know, kind of like off like this, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when I solder them, I solder one leg and then flip it over. Like you can see, this one's kind of a little bit off the top of the circuit board right there, right? So I'll go to the other side now, and I'm gonna heat it up and then press it with my finger so it kind of like sits down flat, you know. Oops, let me see if I can get that guy. Yes, now he's kind of on there a little better. Actually, he's not. And I can feel it with my finger, like he's kind of sitting down there flat now, right? Do the same with this guy. Right, so now I know these guys are kind of sitting on there really good. And then I'll solder the other leg after that. So C12 or no, C11 is 100 UF. That's one of these guys right here. It's a pretty big capacitor. It's for the power supply, like it filters the power supply. So if you have a like ripple in your power supply, like this kind of acts as like a reservoir to like smooth that out, right? So you don't have like any kind of 60 cycle hum or something going into your pedal.
Oh, nice.
Right, and C13 is a 47U capacitor, so it's about half the size of this one, and it does the same thing. So they both act together as like the kind of power supply filter. I don't have a 47 UF one, but what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to put another one of these 100 UF ones there, and I think it won't matter. You know?
Okay.
Shouldn't matter. They'll just both do the same thing. So those are going to, that's going to be my change to the circuit, you know? These big electrolytic capacitors too, sometimes I do the same thing where I'll solder one leg and then make sure they're sitting flat against the surface of the PC board. These are a little bigger, like, you know, but I think this should be plenty. There should be plenty of room in the box for this, right?
Well, it's designed to take some of those anyways, right?
Well,
C11 is supposed to be that part.
Well, what I'm worried about is that when we put these pots in here like this, that the height from here, you know, and the switch, right? So the height from here where the top of the box is going to be to here to the bottom of the box, like this isn't going to hit the lid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I think it's going to be fine though. As a matter of fact, I got a box right here, and we can kind of compare it, right? So I think that's going to fit in there just fine. You know, it'll just barely fit. And then actually you can kind of hang out the bottom of the box a little bit. The way the lid sits on here, there's a tiny bit of space beyond the bottom edge here. So I think that that this is going to be fine, right? So I think that that's going to be okay. So we'll put these back in. It's good to do that though, because you don't want to be surprised like when you put it together and then it doesn't fit in the box. You know, you're like, shit. So I'm missing a couple capacitors, and C5 is a weird size. It's 120 nanofarads, and I don't have one of those. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make one. I have two parts right here. So I'm gonna make one. This is like 100 nanofarad capacitor right here. And this one's 22 nanofarads. So if I put those together, I should have 120 nanofarads, right? So if if we put them in parallel like this, the you know, electronically they'll add the values together. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you put them in series, it works a little differently. But if you put them in parallel, they just add together. They act as a larger capacitor, right? So, and we can test that with this little device. I'd recommend anybody get one of these multifunction testers off of eBay. This cost me $17, and it tests anything. Like you can test. It doesn't test ICs, but you can test transistors and diodes and capacitors and resistors. And so you just take a part, and you can't see the 3 here, but it should be yellow, and it says 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? And if you just make sure the legs of the part go into a different numbered slot, it doesn't matter which one. So I'm going to put this capacitor here in a 1 and a 3 spot, and then hit the button, and then it tells me that this is a 97 nanofarad capacitor, right? So it should be 100, but it's off by a little bit, right? So, but that's okay. So that's 97, and then this guy right here will test it, and it's it's 21.73 nanofarads, right? So if we take both of these guys together, I'll just actually, we can even test them in here, right? I'll put them both in here. And then press the button, and it says 118.9 nanofarads. So that's pretty good. That's pretty close to what we want.
Yeah, 120.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So we'll do that. So I'll just take these guys and kind of like bend the legs of one of the parts around the other, and then put it into the spot here. And I think there's plenty of room right here on the circuit board for both of these guys, right? I don't think I can get both the legs through there, right? So,
yeah, I was wondering about that. So you just solder one basically to the other one, and then...
Yeah, just like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah, there we go, right? So that looks pretty good. So then I'll just solder this guy on there, solder these two together, and then I'll solder the whole thing into the circuit board, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Looks pretty good, right? Let's see here, and then we'll solder this other leg on there.
I think for me that would be something where I'd need to have the little helping hands.
Oh yeah, that'd be really useful. let's see here. So then I'll put the thing here. Let me make sure that this doesn't short out on something else, right? I just turn it around like this. Let's actually, before we do it too, we'll test and make sure that there's enough room for this switch in there too,
Okay.
right? Yeah, I think that's going to be good, right? It'll just fit. I think that looks okay. I think that looks acceptable. Great. So now we need these diodes here. Okay, so these diodes, it's hard to see, but they have a little stripe on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to match that to the stripe on the circuit board,
nice.
right? So this has to go, they have to go, they're, you know, it matters what direction they're facing, right? This one goes the other way. This is the clipping diodes too, so there's some mojo around these diodes, but that's a conversation for after we get the thing built, you know. And
you have, this version, you have choices, right?
Well, they just show part as like 1N94914, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's another one that's like, what is it? It's 1N4148. And that one is like the same part pretty much as the 914. Like the 4148 is like the same as the 914. As far as I understand. I don't know what these are. These are one or the other. So I'm just going to use these. But I think the original one had a slightly different diode. It was like some Japanese version of this part or something very similar to this, but a different manufacturer or something. I don't think it matters too much. Though I'm sure like the perfectionists and the tone people have something to say about it. Yeah, what else do we got to do? There's a couple capacitors that need to go in there. Oh, well, there's this other diode, D6, and it's this is one that they use this to protect against reverse polarity. So it's like reverse polarity protection. So like if you were to plug the power supply in backwards, you'd be sacrificing this diode over ruining your circuit, right? Or some other parts in the circuit. Here we go. These kind of bigger diodes, they have like thicker legs too, so sometimes it's hard to get them into through the holes on the circuit board and get a good soldering joint. Again, look at the stripe, right? So the stripe's over on this side, and there's the stripe on the part. We got to make sure it's facing the right way. Usually, these ones that are oriented, some of the I should have said that when I soldered these big electrolytic capacitors, because they have a negative leg and a positive leg. The stripe here is the negative leg, right? So the negative leg is over here and here, and then if you look, might be hard to see, but if you look at the pads. Usually the square pad is the positive leg, right? So this one's square and that one's round. It's hard to see there, but like if you look really close, like you'll see that one. So they don't always do that, but usually that's what they do. That's why I like this circuit board's pretty good because they did that everywhere. And then this diode, you can see like the positive leg has the square pad and that one has the round pad, right? The LED will have that too. So yeah, if you look at the LED, like the positive leg and the LED will go here and the negative leg will go there because that one's square. You kind of marked it too. It shows a tiny little plus sign above this guy. And then the power supply too. So the positive power supply goes here because it goes in the square hole, right? Okay, so there we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, well, why don't we solder on the socket, and then that way we can replace the chip and try different chips.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Right, and then if with a chip you do something and it burns up, usually the chips are pretty good, but if it ever got burnt up or something, we could like take it out and replace it, right? It's a little hard to solder this, like it'll fall out. You can't really bend these legs, right? So what I think I'm going to do is kind of hold it in place and try and tack one of the legs down. Do it this way with this leg. I'll heat it up and get a little solder on the end there. Yeah, so now that leg's kind of holding it in place, right? And then I can solder one of these other legs. I'm going to do the opposite corner. So I did the one corner. I'm going to do the opposite corner. And then I can kind of heat up the two corners and press the socket in just to make sure it's like flush against the board. There we go, right? And then solder the other legs. Ah, done.
Very cool.
There we go, right? Okay. Okay, so let's see here. So we're going to continue. We need a couple of these capacitors are still missing here. So it looks like C8, C2, and C10. Right, let's see. So let's see. So let's put a couple of these in place here. But anyway, I think that's looking pretty good there. We just need 2 transistors. Let's do a little research on those transistors because it just says on the build diagram, it just says Si, which is silicon. So it's kind of like, I think he's implying like you could just use any silicon transistor, you know, and then for the stock version, he lists a part number like 2SC1815. But this is like a weird part. Like you don't see these a lot. It's just kind of some generic transistor, but not one that's common. You know what would have been really helpful here is it says silicon, but it doesn't say whether it's an NPM or a PNP. So we should check that. Let's go look at the schematic here. What has it got there? Looks like it's got like the transistor has a little arrow, right? And it's pointing out. That's the emitter. And if it's pointing out, then it's an NPN because it's not pointing in. Yeah, right. And the PNP is pointing in, right? So this is how to remember that. So this is just any generic NPN transistor, which I got a bunch of transistors, so I'm sure we could find one that'll work, right? It's probably just like a, you know, a 2N5088 or something like that, you know? I think the originals were these 2SC81815, which is this part. So we'll use these. These are kind of the supposedly like the original. Let's see. Yeah, so these have like a little shape there and they're flat on one face. Right? And so like the shape on the circuit board there, it's kind of flat on one side. Right here, right? So we got to make sure this is oriented the correct direction. Right? I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, in this circuit, the 2 transistors here, there's one at the very beginning that acts as a buffer, so it kind of buffers your signal going into the circuit. And then there's one at the very end which acts as a follower, so it's kind of like an output buffer, you know? And that's what these guys do right here. The funny thing is that a lot of people make a modified version of Tube Screamer. Like there's a lot of modded ones, and the most popular mod that people build stuff around is taking off the 2 transistors. So it's just the op amp. They just take off the input buffer and the output buffer, you know.
And what does that do?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. I think it simplifies the whole circuit. I don't know that it actually
sonically.
Does much for the sound.
Okay.
Doesn't hurt the sound. I mean, you kind of lose the buffer, but I don't know. Some of the like the Zen Drive is that way. It doesn't have these, and it sounds great. You know. Anyway, so there we go. I think we're good, right?